please join me in welcoming our next panel for Falling in Love. We have joining us authors Kalynn Bayron, Casey McQuinston, Ashley Woodfolk, and moderated by Camryn Garret, to talk about sapphic stories of many genres and styles. Please give a round of applause. Thanks.
Oh, maybe I should. Everyone else did. Yeah.
Are we allowed to just hold the mic?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I might yawn a lot. I came back last night.
Hi.
Hi. Are we allowed to start whenever? Okay, awesome. So this is the Falling in Love panel, which is about FF, but I have a very pressing question for everyone. I kept pronouncing the name of this panel FF Falling in Love, and apparently that's not how it's pronounced. So my first question is, when you see F, it's F/F. Do you pronounce it F/F, or do you say FF when you discuss two women or girls falling in love in a book?
FF.
I would
Yeah.
say, FF.
FF.
Yeah.
I'm the only one who says F/F. So you're all here because all of your books feature a relationship between two female characters, and I wanted to ask what made you decide to center those relationships in your book?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Can you hear me okay? So I think that when it comes to representation, I think we're always looking for more. And I think that for a long time, queer stories have been kind of laser focused on teaching very important lessons, kind of, making a point of certain stories and certain storylines. And I think that we just deserve more representation, more stories that just kind of allow us to exist on the page.
Definitely.
Especially writing fantasy, which is what I write. It's nice to kind of be able to see girls, especially Black girls, get together and have these stories that are not just solely about their queerness, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Ika Shar Wheeler, I specifically wanted to have not just two girls who were falling for each other, but two girls who were not very nice, make a lot of bad decisions, and do a lot of
I noticed that.
messy and irresponsible things throughout the book. Because I feel like not only do we need more stories about queer girls in YA, but we need more stories about teenage girls who aren't nice. Because I think we put so much pressure on teenage girls to, especially in the South where this book is set, to keep it cute and keep it sweet, and that puts girls into a lot of messed up and vulnerable positions, especially when you're young. And so I wanted to do a love story between two girls that wasn't soft. Not that there's anything wrong with a soft love story, but the one I wanted to tell was one that was pretty messy and complicated, because that's what teenagers are. And sometimes your first love is a hot mess, and that's true. If
Tagline for your book.
Yeah, sometimes your first love is a hot mess, and that's true. I think sometimes especially so with two women. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of exactly what everybody else has been saying. I mean, I think for a really long time, queer stories were basically about coming out, and that was it. And then they were about trauma, and that was it. And then we sort of turned a corner, which I think is a great corner to turn, into these really sweet, cute stories, because queer people never really had those. So we have a ton of queer rom-coms now, which I think are awesome. But then we need all the other stuff too, right? Because being a queer person and existing is a mix of all different kinds of experiences, and they're not all cute, and they're not all coming out, and they're not all trauma, right? So when I was writing Nothing Burns as Bright as You, similar to I Could Share Wheeler, is these characters are messy. These characters make a lot of mistakes. Like the book literally starts with them setting a fire at their school, and so like they're not good girls. Like there's a chapter called Good Kids TM, and the whole chapter is about how people like they're not good kids, and that's okay. Also, I mean, like, what is a good kid? But that's like a whole different, like, conversation that we don't have to get into. And I think especially black girls, black femmes, black kids in general aren't really given the space to exist and exist fully, right? They're either labeled bad or they're labeled good, and that is it. And there's so much more complexity to existing in a black body in the, in this country, in this world. And so when I was writing Nothing Burns as Bright as You, I sort of wanted to create characters who embodied that complexity. So, they are girls who are super smart and also really devious. They are girls who love each other desperately, but also are toxic AF. And I think that's okay because I think that's real. So yeah, I wrote this story because I had a lot of those kinds of relationships, and I had never seen them in a book written with compassion. They were always sort of labeled as bad. And I wanted to write something that sort of gave it the space to be everything that it is.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so I'm going to stay on you.
Okay.
How do you think, this was your first book that you wrote in verse.
Yes.
So how do you think writing in verse helped you get your point across? All the things that you just talked about, this dichotomy that black girls are sort of forced into, this toxicity, how do you think writing through poetry helped get that across the reader?
Yeah, so not a lot happens in this book. If you've read any of my novels, like they're kind of, I'm much more of a character writer than I am a plot writer, and so none of my books, like, not that much happens in any of my books. It's much more focused on, like, the relationships between the characters and, like, who the characters are. And I would say that also rings true for Nothing Burns as Bright as You. It starts with these girls setting a fire, and then, the whole book is set over the course of a single day, but there are these flashbacks, so you sort of get the history of their relationship and the sort of how they know each other, how they relate to each other, all that kind of stuff, and how they relate to themselves. But I think writing in verse gave me an opportunity to focus on the emotion behind a first love, and especially a toxic first love, because the feelings in those kinds of relationships can be so intense. I think sometimes prose makes it a little bit more difficult to express the emotions and make the story really about the relationship, because the story needs to be about more. But when you have less space because you're writing in verse, you can really hone in on how the characters feel about each other, how the characters feel about themselves. And, as they're sort of going over this, like they set a fire and then they sort of go around their town throughout the day. And like I said, not much happens, but you sort of get to see how they relate to each other and how they feel super strongly about each other and the things that they are willing to do for each other. And I think that was what I really wanted to focus on when I was writing this, was that relationship, because, like I said, that relationship is almost never given compassion and like space to exist on the page, and I really wanted my book to do that.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Casey, I'm gonna ask an annoying question. You said that I Kissed Shara Wheeler was inspired by a lot of like teen movies that you liked. Are there any like particular tropes from those movies that made it in? I don't want to spoil. I know there's like a mystery element to the book, so don't spoil, but as much as you can.
I mean, I think that for a lot of reasons, Julia Stiles as Kat Stratford in 10 Things I Hate About You was very formative for me on like a storytelling character trope type that I like level, and also on like a gay awakening level. And I think that really shows up in the character of Chloe. I think I was really, really drawn to writing this main character who was really difficult and standoffish to her peers and like doesn't care what people think of her, but secretly she does. And she always has a one-liner, and she's like kind of hot in a weird way. That was like a character I was really drawn to writing, so I feel like that really shows up. One trope that I love, and I'm like, I can't think of a specific example because I feel like it's in all of them, which is the trope of like climbing through your crush's bedroom window with a ladder. I feel like showed up in a lot of like late 90s rom-coms, like teen rom-coms. And I always thought that was like somehow the most romantic thing in the world. So I put it in like 5 times.
I know. I was like counting.
They're just like constantly climbing in people's windows in this book. So I put that one in. I think that I was a big Gilmore Girls fan, and I think that there was something about like the academic rivalry between Rory and Paris that while it may not have been actually a romance on the show, it was a romance in my heart.
Yeah.
And I think that dynamic shows up a lot in like Chloe. It wasn't like a conscious thing that I put in, but I do think it's present in Chloe and Shara's dynamic. Trying to think of some other greatest hits. The OC. Shout out to anybody who was old enough to watch The OC as it aired.
This excludes me.
You want to know how I watched it? It aired, I remember the season finale of season 1, the season finale of Lost season 1 aired at the same time, so I had to videotape the OC season finale, which is, I think, something that, Camryn, you might not have ever experienced in your life.
I'm not. No.
But there's, at the end of season 1...
the best season.
Yes. Seth runs away on a sailboat. And I don't want to spoil anything, but there is a sailboat involved in Shara's story. So I feel like, I don't know if that counts as a trope, but I do feel like Rory,
No, that's
Rory,
definitely a trope, because that happened in Dawson's Creek.
it happened in Gilmore Girls.
It happened
They stole
in
a
Gilmore
boat.
Girls, yeah.
Kids were still in boats in 2004. I don't know why. But so there's some boat action happening. Yeah, those are some of my favorites, for sure. Yeah.
I think that's excellent. Oh my God, sorry. So, Kalynn, your book that we're talking about today is a sequel. And I've noticed in a lot of sequels, if there's an established relationship in the first book, in the second book, there's sort of like a test to that relationship. So, talking about tropes again, how did you address that trope, decide to make it your own, and sort of mess with it?
Yeah, so This Wicked Fate is the follow-up to This Poison Heart. And in that first book, there's a relationship there with Briseis and Marie. There's also the relationship between Mo and Mom, and then their relationship with Briseis as their daughter. There are platonic relationships that kind of go left, and that Briseis has to kind of pick up the pieces afterwards. So I think that in book 2, it's really an examination of all of those different relationships. The romantic ones, the platonic ones, the ones that you have with your family. It's a way of kind of re-examining them and how they play into the overall story, which in my case is this kind of contemporary fantasy. I like to describe this series as The Secret Garden meets Little Shop of Horrors with a Greek mythology twist. It is,
and black people,
and it's all yes, and black folks, and queer people, and queer families, and so writing book 2 from a technical point of view, it was tough. I have a tendency to kind of move on. Once I've finished something, I have to move on, you know? And so I'm like, wait, what did I write in the first book? Because let me make sure I'm not retreading the same ground. But then from a kind of storytelling point of view, it's really nice to be able to revisit these characters and kind of delve deeper into their relationships. But the relationship between Briseis and Marie is central. And there is nothing but, and this is not really a spoiler, it's more just kind of, just kind of letting people know there's nothing very difficult about this relationship between the two of them. It really is about support and the kind of mutual respect that they have for each other. and Marie trying to help Briseis get to the bottom of this very involved mystery with her family. So I think it's nice to be able to showcase that, to center that relationship between these two queer Black girls. And then with book one, people were telling me, you have so many queer Black people in one story. Like, is that realistic? And I'm just like, yeah. So with book two, I made a point to make more queer Black women. So I think we're, coming up on a dozen, characters who are queer, who are Black, who are women, who are kind of navigating the world, and it feels like a celebratory thing for me.
It definitely does.
But the thing, it's so weird to me when people say that like
is.
a lot of queer people together is not realistic.
Yeah.
I'm like, have you met a queer person
we
any
club
of their
together.
friends?
Yes.
Because we travel in packs.
Yes.
Like literally, even before I knew I was queer, like all of my friends were queer.
Right.
And I was like, wait.
You're like, I'm such a good ally.
I know. I was like, I'm so
They're looking at
passionate.
you like, wait a minute.
They're
wait a
like,
minute.
girl,
Yeah.
you're one of us.
So going off of what you were saying, I was wondering if any of you felt sort of pressure to depict queer relationships or queer characters in a specific way. Do you feel, have you seen the movie Fire Island?
No, but I saw
The Bechdel test discourse.
The Bechdel test. We will not get into that on this panel. But Joel Kim Booster, who wrote Fire Island, which if you don't know is a queer retelling of Pride and Prejudice, he was saying that he felt immense pressure to represent every type of queer person in this movie. And do you feel that pressure? Do you not feel that pressure? How do you interact with that in your writing and your work?
I think there's pressure. I don't know if it's pressure. There's definitely voices that are saying, oh, there's not a coming out. Oh, there's not a traumatic coming out. There's not, some kind of conflict with this character's queerness. Like, no, they're okay. They're fine with how they are. They're trying to solve a mystery. They're trying to, wake up and eat breakfast. Like, they got things to do. Like, it doesn't always have to be like that. And so I do feel, I do hear that. And that is not necessarily, that's coming from outside my kind of circle of people who are involved in, the production of a book. My editor is great. She never has asked me to compromise in that way. But there's, there's people who have opinions and think that you should know them. So as it goes on, it's easier to kind of block those voices out. But I do hear it. I do hear that. I do hear the expectation that when you're writing a queer story, that it should involve some kind of pain, that it should involve some kind of trauma, and not even in a way that is, helpful. Sometimes we need books to help us navigate trauma and pain, and we, unfortunately, we live in a world that guarantees we will continue to need those types of stories. But just having that in there just for trauma's sake is, I could never do that. So I hear the voices, but I don't listen.
I mean, I think that I've encountered this, and I'm sure you guys have encountered it to an even greater extent. The standards that queer love stories are held to are so much higher than the standards that straight love stories are held to in fiction. I feel like straight love stories get so much room to have different kinds of dynamics and power balances and explore different themes and go in all these different directions. And I feel like sometimes when you're writing a queer love story, there are, like Kalynn was saying, these voices on the outside who want you to set a really good example of a perfect, ethically pure, morally correct, nobody ever does anything wrong type of queer love story, because you're trying to create ambassadors for queerness to go out into the world and convince straight people that you should empathize with us, which is not fair to queer people. It's not fair to queer characters. It's not fair to people who look to books to see some type of love that they relate to, because nobody has a perfect love story. And so that's really frustrating, because I would love to read more books where people do messed up and weird, not reprehensible, but I mean you're allowed to make bad choices sometimes and mess up and then have to apologize for it, or like, oh, she cheated because she's like kind of going through something, and like that's not necessarily great, but like let's see how we can play with the story. I that's definitely one side of the pressure, and I think also we, especially in YA, you walk a really fine line of well, if I put anything beyond like a chaste kiss in this book, I'm gonna have 7,000 people trying to ban it tomorrow. And if I don't put any of it in, then I feel like I'm letting queer readers down by acting like that's not fit to print. So it is this kind of tightrope that you walk sometimes. And at the end of the day, I think you just have to write what feels right and what works for the story, and put your readers first and put what they want to read first.
Sure.
I don't care about anybody.
It's a perfect answer.
I think about the kids, I guess. I think about the way that I felt when I was 15 or 16, and I think about the 15 or 16-year-olds that are out there that might pick up the book and what they want to read, what will ring true for them. I think the only thing that I was nervous about was the fact that I am straight passing, that I'm married to a man, and I was worried that there would be some like identity policing. So far, that hasn't been like anything major that I've had to deal with. But even that, I was just kind of like, well, it's not about me. It's not about any of the adults who might try to come for me. It's not about, the people who might try to ban this book. It's about the kids who need the book. And so I just try to keep those people top of mind and like not care about anybody else's opinion.
Yeah. Tearing up. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to ask a more fun question. Casey, you mentioned Rory in Paris as like a very early aughts, not very early, sorry, an early aughts.
Camryn, you're gonna make us all feel old up here.
I'm sorry. But do any of you have like an inspiration from a piece of media that encouraged you to write the sort of characters in your own stories, whether they were queer, like in the show or the movie, or not?
I wouldn't say this inspired the story, because I feel like what inspired the story was like my own like messed up history. But Euphoria, I feel, has a lot of similarities to Nothing Burns as Bright as You, as far as like the way that the girls interact and the fact that they are so confused and they feel so many big feelings and they're not sure where to put them. I think that is really, really similar to the characters in my story. I also really related to, there's this graphic novel called Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me.
Yes, I've heard of it.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I feel like that was the first time I had read a queer story that had like a not so healthy relationship in it, and I was like there should be more of these, because just the in the same way that straight relationships are sometimes messy, like queer relationships are like that too. And I think that's especially true when you're young and you're still figuring out your sexuality and you have a super close friend that you're always touching and you're like, wait, why do I like touching this person? So yeah, I feel like those two are pretty similar.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I literally have a list. I wrote it down because I'm always, people like will ask me a question about inspiration or like, couples that are in the media and it's like I blank.
You forget everything you've
I wrote
ever
it
seen.
down. So even though these are not specifically inspirations for the story itself is just kind of like you were saying. It's just kind of my own life, my own experiences, things that I love, The Secret Garden, Little Shop of Horrors, musicals, scary stories, things like that. So, but in media, so Ryan and Sophie from Batwoman, they didn't get justice for them because they didn't get what they deserved on that show. Also, Danny and Jamie from The Haunting of Bly Manor. I love scary stories, and they had a plant shop. They had it all. Scotty and Irene from She Drives Me Crazy by Kelly Quinlan, and Liz and Mac from You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. There's so many queer stories that are inspiring to me right now as I move forward and work on, book 3, 4, 5. It's like, I'm so inspired by the queer media that we have right now. So, yeah.
Okay. I should have written something down because now I'm blanking. But I will say Korra and Asami.
Iconic.
Yeah, iconic. Really came out of like really didn't think they were gonna go there, and then they did. It was so exciting. I was a big fan of Buffy growing up. It was like my bonding activity with my older sister, and like Willow and Tara's arc was very illuminating. Really, really loved that. And then they were never together in the text, but I did read a lot of Hermione and Ginny fan fiction growing up. It was one of those things where I'm like 13 and I'm like, this is straight behavior. Let me look this up. Yeah, I feel like those are some of my Mount Rushmore. But there's so many more now that I love and that are really exciting. I'm really excited to watch First Kill and see how that is. I really enjoy watching Euphoria and watching some of those relationships. Yeah.
Euphoria stresses me out. I don't know how you
I mean, it's stressful, but like...
Yeah, no, it's super stressful. I had one other one that I just remembered. Blue is the warmest color. That movie destroyed my life, but I feel like that, I don't know, that their interaction, their relationship, and the way that the movie ends, and the fact that you sort of get to see where each character ends up, I feel like that was a pretty formative movie for me when I was younger.
And I feel like I was just trying to look it up, but I couldn't Google fast enough. I cannot remember the names of the main two lesbians on Sense. Well, it was a lesbian and bisexual on Sense8. The main.
Oh yes.
I cannot remember their names right
now. One of the
Somebody
actresses
yell
is
them.
named Jamie Clayton.
Yes.
That's all I know. I'm sorry. The
somebody-
audience, please phone in.
Can we ask the audience? Nobody knows. Okay. Hang on.
I was just checking to see how much time we have
I'll look it up
left.
real quick. Okay, since
We're good? Okay,
We're
awesome.
good?
Okay.
Shall
I
Nomi and
pause?
Amanita. Okay, sorry.
Amazing. What are more, I think we've sort of covered this question, but are there any more types of stories that you feel we haven't seen in terms of F/F representation? In YA books specifically, I think it's getting difficult now because we're seeing a lot of the book bannings. Is there anything that you think is super important that we don't see enough of, besides what we already talked about?
I feel like I want more like neurodivergent stories. I feel like I also want more stories that include characters with disabilities, because that's just like not something that exists. Like I feel like there's a few stories out there that center those characters, but they're definitely not queer.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I want to see more of both of those things. One, because I just think we need more of everything, but also because I feel like almost every neurodivergent person I know is not straight. And so I'm just like, let's talk about this, people. Let's write some books. Or rather, let's publish some books, because we know people are writing them, right?
I feel like we've started to see an increase in like non-binary transmasculine representation, like FF, where it's like a I don't want to say AFAB because we don't like that word, but a non-binary person with a girl. But I would love to see more trans feminine representation, and like especially by like trans women authors would be really, really cool. I feel like there's a big gap in our canon right now that really could benefit for some trans feminine representation.
Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely more trans stories by trans authors. And as far as genre, I would really like to see some more scary stories. I love the kind of uptick that we're seeing in scary stories, but I want those stories to center queer people, Black people, intersectional identities. I would like to see more of that.
Yeah. Anyone in the publishing industry you raise your hand, I'm so sorry. Just take note. But yeah, I think we can move on to audience questions now. I'm sorry for fumbling that. If you want to stand up and come to the mic. Yes?
Either one of you.
With the green trousers.
Had to wait for the reveal to see if it was trousers
Or a skirt, yeah.
Exactly. I'm so sorry.
Right now, and I just wanted to ask, like, how, like, with all of the expectations queer writers have, to kind of like tell a specific type of story and to like represent every kind of queer person? How do you like maintain your backbone and like maintain your voice with like as like you're writing your book and then you see this person saying like, oh, well, I want to hear this story, like why didn't you write this? How do you like maintain your backbone and like maintain your integrity like as a queer writer?
Just remember, it's not your responsibility to tell every story. Like, I mean, I think it's easier. It may be easier for writers of color to feel this way just because those expectations are coming at us from like every angle. Like, that's not what it's like to be Black, you know, that's not what it's like to be queer. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not you, and I can only tell a story that feels true and right to me. And so you have to just remember that it's not your job to tell every story. It's your job to tell your story. And you should also keep in mind that if you try to do everything, your book's going to be a hot mess. So do you.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, you do have to focus on the story that you're supposed to tell. That initial kind of drafting process where it's just you and the story is so important because it really establishes, you know, what you're trying to do. And it's not really until you get these other kind of outside voices that sometimes you start to question that. There's good outside voices like editors that you trust, you know, people that you trust with your work, but you know, initially you really just have to write the story that you want to tell because nobody can tell it the way you can tell it. And there is a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure for queer stories to represent all queer people all the time, and it's impossible. And so you don't have to shoulder that responsibility. You can set that down and just write the story that you want to tell.
I also think the broader that you try to write and the more you try to make something that's universal, the more that's going to show, and it's not going to feel authentic and it's not going to feel universal. It's just going to feel really confused. And I think what is actually universal is stories that have a ton of specificity and a really, really clear idea of what they're about and what they're trying to say, because anybody can come into a really specific story and find something in that to relate to. And so I think really exactly what they were saying, like narrowing down into like what is the story that you want to tell is actually going to broaden its like range more than you even realize. So
And trust yourself.
yeah.
Just trust yourself.
And it's always about the reader too. Like the voices are really annoying sometimes in your head, but the reader, like the teen reader especially, there's literally no feeling like a teen reader being like, I read your book and it spoke to me in a way that nothing has spoken to me before. So that's what you're writing for.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering, during this time where it seems that, at least from my perspective, that there are so many more, particularly in young adult fiction, more diverse books coming out, a lot more queer books coming out, and yet still there were so little sapphic books that were being published. What were the sort of challenges and also joys that came from sort of pushing sapphic books into the mainstream media within the within YA fiction? And also just a very random specific question for Casey. In Red, White, and Royal Blue, how did you come up with the turkey scene? I was always very curious about it. Thank you.
Answer that first.
Okay, I'll start with that. That was literally one of the last scenes I wrote for the entire book because it was Thanksgiving when I was doing my final run through of that draft, and I was like, I can't believe I forgot about turkey pardoning. What a ridiculous comedic thing that Americans do. Let's throw it in. Also, I personally am absolutely terrified of large birds because I was attacked by a goose as a child.
Oh my God. Geese are vicious.
That's true.
They really are.
They are predators. So that was where it came from. I just needed a way for them to be on the phone for the first time. And originally they were having an argument over who was the ugliest beetle. And so I rewrote that scene to be the turkey scene that
Release the deleted scene.
Yeah. They had a lot of it was the whole debate was are we talking ugly on the inside or the outside? And so it got really, there's a lot of debate to be had there. Anyway, but what was the first part of the question?
The first
The
part
first part was
Oh.
about like
Oh,
sapphic.
sapphic books. Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to, as somebody who's published queer books that both are and are not centering sapphic characters, you have to be really prepared for the reception to feel different if you do that. Because, like, I feel like with sapphic romance, it's a bit more of a slow burn with your readership sometimes, where it's a little quieter and it's just like there's a different temperature to it. There's a different vibe to it. For a lot of reasons, partially because you're going to lose a lot of the straight girls. It's just hard to say it, but it's true. So you have to be prepared for that. I mean, the things that are hard about it, honestly, is just I think we're still just coming into convincing these like gatekeepers in publishing who sign the checks that like this is a worthwhile investment, and that it's something that will pay off for them. And you hate to put it in those terms, but that's the terms they think in. And so, I mean, I'm sitting here with two people who are like proving that it's a worthwhile investment, and we just have to keep doing that. So keep buying the books, folks. I don't know what else to say about that, but I mean, you want to...
I mean, I feel like misogyny is real,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And we're getting it double. That's kind of what it comes down to. And I mean, sometimes triple, right? If your characters are not white. So I think the important thing is to just remember that there is an audience for this, because the world and sometimes the industry will try to tell you that there isn't, but like we know that we exist. We know that there are people who are willing to read about us, even if they aren't the exact same identities, that we are writing about. We know what the truth is, and we know that these stories deserve to be told and that they matter. So I think that despite, I guess, the uphill battle that sometimes sapphic stories have, I think it's worth it. And I think the more of these stories that are published and that can find some success in the world, the more likely that more of them will be published. And we'll sort of have to just stand our ground, and it'll prove itself over time. I think as long as people are buying the books, supporting the books, being vocal about wanting the books, that will keep writing them. I know one very simple thing. I was asking on Twitter, like when all of the book banning stuff first started, I was like, well, what are some ways, some like normal, like easy, everyday ways that people can show support for queer titles that are, sort of facing a lot of this opposition? And one thing that someone said that I thought was really wise and really simple, and it's something that everyone has access to, is just requesting the book at your library. It's like a super simple thing. Like you don't even have to go to the library to do it. You can do it online. And the more requests that a library is flooded with, the more copies of the books they will order. And so that in and of itself is super supportive and super helpful. You don't need money. You don't need to be able to physically go there. And I thought that was something that was really, really great. So do that. If you have the money to purchase books, purchase books. If you have a blog or a Goodreads account, or even if you buy a book from Amazon, like write a review, just like continue to support the books. And I think that will help us sort of move over this hump of misogyny and, lesbophobia. That we're sort of climbing this uphill battle, but we can do it together.
Yeah. I agree so much with all of that. I think the difficulty comes in the pushback. I think it's seeing these stories that I think mean so much to me personally, being banned. My first novel, Cinderella is Dead, has been banned in San Antonio, Texas, in Katy, Texas, in Kent, Washington, in multiple places across the U.S. And it's difficult because I know how much a book like that would have helped me when I was younger, kind of figure out some things about myself a little sooner, or just make me feel like there was a place in this world for me. And so I think about the readers who are being denied that. And while that is the most discouraging part, it's also the part that fuels the drive to kind of continue writing these stories. It's because people need them, and I need them. I still need them. I still need to see queer Black girls getting to live, their best life, getting to be the chosen ones and the dragon tamers and the people who are fought over and who are worth fighting for. So I think there's the pushback is where I find the most difficulty, but I always have those readers and my 15 or 16-year-old self in the back of my mind when I'm writing these stories. So we're gonna just keep it pushing. We'll keep creating the stories. Yeah.
You lined up. I'm so proud.
I think that actually kind of touches on a question that I have. So I think one of the reasons that I go to YA, especially more in the past few years, is the sense of optimism and kind of like, even if things get challenging in the story, it's gonna end in some kind of positive or optimistic way. And I'm just interested in hearing from you all, what do you do to keep up that sense of like optimism and like celebration of your characters and their multiple identities, especially in a time when there are so many forces seeking to stomp that out? Because for me, it's reading books by y'all, and you guys are the ones creating them. So I'm just interested in hearing what you do to restore that and restore yourselves, to put that kind of positivity out there, because it's hard out here.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. And thank you for reading. For me, it's hearing from readers. Like, that really is always uplifting for me. If I get, I write, a lot of my books are kind of sad, but I always get notes saying that, like, a reader has recently been through something and my book made them feel like they weren't alone, or that they had never read a book that they saw themselves so clearly in. And just hearing that, those people exist and they're reading my work and it's helping them feel a little bit better in this, like, shitstorm that we're in, is enough to sort of keep me optimistic and to keep me wanting to continue to create. I think, when times get dark, anything that you can hold on to make you remember the light is good. And I think it's an incredible honor to be a source of light for anyone. So for me, that's what it is for me. I just think about the readers. Again, like, I don't care about anybody but the kids, okay? I'm just thinking about the kids. And like Kalynn said, like, my younger self in the back of my mind, and like, what did I need? What would have helped me, and what is gonna help them? And so if something I write could help someone, like, that is sort of what keeps me going and keeps me hopeful.
Yeah. I find a lot of inspiration in community with other writers and their work, their amazing work. It really feels like we're all trying very hard to uplift our stories and ourselves and kind of pour back into each other. We're constantly, putting ourselves and our experiences into these stories. It's nice to have other people to kind of come along and help you kind of carry this thing that sometimes feels heavy because of the way the world is. So I think it's about community, and for me, it's also about taking the time to refill that creative well. So whether it's taking in other stories, other forms of media, whether it's music or theater or movies or TV, or kind of taking those things in to refill your creative well, and also giving yourself the grace to take a break. It's hard sometimes to say, okay, I need a break, or I need a moment to deal. But I think it's all it's all about kind of taking the time for that self-care and for finding your community and your readers, because they are out there. So yeah.
I mean, all of those things very much. Also, a small team of mental health professionals, and I would say
and
also
medication.
Yeah, and I would say also spending time with why I love and feel proud of and happy about the parts of my identity that create art for people like me. So like, why do I love, like, you know, being, what do I love about being queer? You know, like, I love the expansiveness of it. I love the endlessness of it and how it like fills my life, you know? And the same thing with like, every day I experiment with gender in a different way, and that feels so fun and expansive. And I think like growing up in a pretty repressive environment, the first things that made me realize that I could think differently than what was around me was seeing beauty in queerness, like hearing a really beautiful song that had super gay lyrics and being like, well, this is so beautiful that it feels like it's of God, and if that's true, then it can't be wrong. So let's begin to unpack from there. Just like reconnecting with that root of like joy and beauty being rooted in queerness, and that being replenishing in itself, I think as a creative queer person is absolutely crucial. But also, yes, everything that they said.
I feel like the thing that you said about like queerness being expansive and like closer to God or whatever, there's this kid on TikTok who like told his mom that God was non-binary and like pansexual or something, and she was like, where did you hear that? And he was like, in school. And she was like, no, your school did not tell you that. And she was like, and he said, well, they said that God loves everyone. And isn't he a man, but he's always wearing a dress? And I just thought that was so like beautiful and like such a like innocent way to think about it. But like,
I love that.
God probably is pan and non-binary. Like,
Oh yeah.
right? Like, so anyway.
I think that's excellent. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to torture them with OC questions because I did not see it. Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering, when you write, do you have like a routine to continue to keep you like writing or start writing?
Oh, so routine has gone out the window these past like few years before that, and I have kids, and so it's kind of like we had a routine where everybody was going to school, and I was getting like 5 hours of writing time in the middle of the day, and it was beautiful. And then COVID happened, everybody was homeschooled. I don't know if you ever tried to like homeschool 4 children, but it's a mess. So I had to learn to adapt, which is not always easy for me because I do love a routine. But I think for me, right now it's just about getting the words in when I can, whether it's on my phone or my laptop, at my desk, you know, whatever I have to do to get the words in, that's all that matters. And sometimes it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes it's, you know, it's in the middle of the day. So it really is just about trying to find the time to get the words in. If I can put the words on the page, I can always make them better. And so that's the most important thing for me.
Yeah, I feel bad for even acting like I have a job now. I mean, for me, I actually had kind of an opposite experience where COVID forced me to develop a routine, because before I was very much like a write whenever inspiration hits type of writer, and COVID basically destroyed my work-life balance, and I had to put myself on a 9-to-5 schedule. So now I like will get up in the morning and do all my emails in the morning, and then I'll have like dedicated writing time, and I'll do sprints, and I'll do all of that stuff, because otherwise it will be like 2 in the morning, and not for any good reason, because I have 4 kids, just because I just like dicked around all day. I will be like, I gotta get 500 more words in before I go to sleep, and also that's just not good. That's not good for my back or my brain. And so, yeah, I try to stick to a 9-to-5 schedule now.
I'm kind of like Kalynn in that I don't have a schedule anymore. I had one before COVID. I only have 1 kid, but he was in daycare before COVID, and so I had my 5-hour chunk. I would drop him off. I would go to my little work like space. Yeah. I would do my little writing. It was so cute. And then I didn't have childcare for 2 years. So it was just me and my baby all day. My husband, you know, was working from home, but he had a ton of meetings. So it was basically like mommy daycare. And so, yeah, I kind of got in words where I could get them in. With Nothing Burns as Bright as You, that was a very different writing experience. It was one of those things where I was having all of these like breakthroughs in therapy, and I was like, oh wait, my ass has been gay this whole time. Maybe I should process some of that. And so that writing experience was really feverish in a way that my normal process isn't. I would say my normal process now is similar to Kalynn's, where it's like I'm getting in the words where I can get them in. But I also fall asleep a lot because I'm tired. And I end up, when it's like I have a deadline on Monday, and I have like 2 more chapters to write between today and tomorrow. So that'll be fun.
So fun.
But yeah, I watch too much TikTok, so like excuse all my TikTok examples, but I just feel so seen by TikTok. But there was this person on TikTok, I can't remember who it was, but they said, there's nothing less inspiring than having enough time. And that is very much the way I move through my life, even though it's probably not healthy.
I also think of Audre Lorde talking about how she wrote poetry because she had 2 kids and she had no time to write anything else. So take with what you will.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'd love to get your thoughts or advice or recommendations on books about same-sex parents and families and things like that. I feel like there's a dearth of that, both from adult fiction and also the young adult perspective would be great.
I'm just going to repeat the question. So the question was, do you know any recommendations or advice about books with queer parents or same-sex parents?
Let me take a minute
What's
to
going on?
plug my own book. No, I mean, so I think parents are absent a lot of the time in YA in general, middle grade too, just because it's easier that way. It is easier to write a story, and I've done that where the parents are just not there. But having parents involved is a whole nother way of storytelling, and then also having queer parents and having queer Black parents involved with their queer Black child. It's something that, just on a personal note, really was incredibly rewarding for me to write. I got to write these 2 people, Mom and Mo, are Briseis' moms, and they have a phenomenal, strong, amazing relationship. It has its ups and downs like all relationships do, but it's a normal, functioning, relationship. And I think having stories that depict that, I think we could use more of that. And then I'm trying to think queer parents.
My book has queer parents.
I was about to
jump in.
Yeah, plug your book.
My first book has a Black girl who has a Black dad and a Latino dad. So that's good for me.
Odd One Out by Nick Stone. One of the characters has queer parents. And I was just thinking of a picture book. Nina LaCour's. Yeah, Nina LaCour's Me. What is it?
Mama and
Mommy
and me
in the middle. Yeah. It's super cute. I just bought it. But yeah, I can't think of that
I can
many.
also plug my own book. I Kiss Shar Wheeler, the main character Chloe, has 2 moms. And they are classic, like butch, a welder, and femme opera singer pairing.
Classic. So I think that's all we have time for, but I just wanted to thank you guys for being so open and sharing. I think you're doing signing after this over by that table. So I just wanted to thank you and tell everyone that you can get books signed by these awesome authors over there when you're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, apologies for not knowing the OC. I know the guy was like, he's like, you know what I like about rich kids? Nothing. That's all I know.
Ryan Atwood, the icon.